Would you join me in prayer, please? Lord, I hope I say the words that you would have me say today. However, if I haven't gotten the words right, please help our minds and our hearts to hear you. Hear what you would have us contemplate today and this week. Amen. On what road will you travel? But before you make that decision, wouldn't it help to know where you are? Wouldn't it help to know where you want to go? How do you see the world? Do you see it from space? Or do you see a static world? Do you look out from it? Do you look at it from a macro view or a micro view? From a social view, a political view, an economic view? Through what eyes do you see the world? Perhaps you see it looking for causes. Through your own eyes? Maybe in motion with sound. Through social media? And finally, what filters do you use? Maybe you look at the whole visible spectrum. Or maybe you see just parts of it, like an infrared image. Do you see it through historical eyes? Or do you see it through a combination of the above? Maybe trying to see the world as God would have you see it. So this ends the tease, or the hook, if you will. A couple of weeks ago, I woke up with an insight. Wow, I said. This is something I need to share. Later that day, I sent an email to Pastor David about some of the things that I was planning to do this week at church. And more as a kind of an accountability tool and a coordination tool, so we made sure things were open and ready. He came back with the fact that he was going to be out of town for 2 weeks, especially this Sunday, and he said, would you preach? And I know that he uses the Lectionary quite frequently, so I asked what the subject was, and he said, the Beatitudes. Which, by the way, had nothing to do with the insight that I had that I wanted to share. Nonetheless, for whatever reasons, I said yes. Now, let's get to the meat of this. The lectionary, as you may know, is a schedule of topics in the Bible to be covered on a 3-year rotation. It is not mandatory that a pastor follow it, but the United Methodist Church does support and encourage this method in the discipline of study and preaching. Anyways, this is the 4th Sunday in Epiphany. This year there are 8 Sundays in this liturgical season, lasting obviously from Epiphany, which was January 6th, to the beginning of Lent. The color of the season is green, and sometimes white. And the subject of the season reveal who Jesus is and his early teachings. The Beatitudes are a part of the Gospels, known as the Sermon on the Mount. This sermon only appears in the Gospel of Matthew, beginning in chapter 5. Given the 3-year rotation of the lectionary, my age and when I started to come to church at the first time, I've probably heard between 15 and 20 sermons on the Beatitudes. I remember some of them, that is the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor, but very little of the commentary or insight that was shared. I guess I often see a sermon somewhat like a reporter. I make mental notes. I listen to quotable quotes, and maybe I take a take-home with me I seldom learn a sermon to this subject to the degree that I would need to take a test on it. So when we begin talking about the Sermon on the Mount, I look from the outside in and imagine something like this. You know, a mountain, Jesus standing on the top, probably raising his hands, a big crowd covering the rest of the mountain. I'm standing in the back with my reporter's pad in hand. When you have heard a sermon, considered the subject, or talked about the Sermon on the Mount, have you visualized the scene this way too? Now maybe my understanding might be better if I looked at it from a different view. All right, you caught me. I'm cheating. I'm trying to use a preaching technique known as a sermon shortcut. The statement on the paper is right there. Good. Once again, now maybe my understanding might be better if I look at this subject from a different view. The shortcut is used when the sermon might be too long, or maybe when the explanation might be too complicated, or when the speaker is unclear about the subject, or fearful about being too open about what he thinks. During the past week, Donna, my wife, has caught me pacing and staring out in space. She's asked, "Is everything all right?" I reply, "I'm thinking about the sermon. Can't you see the smoke?" Something about what I've learned about the Beatitudes, or what I think I've learned, or what I feel, or what I think I know about life, or, well, it just doesn't make sense. The details of my debate with myself don't really matter, but if I'm going to convey to you what I think I'm hearing, what the Lord may have suggested to me, I really have to sort these out, these questions, and decide on a direction to go. Hence, what road will I travel? Or how do I see the world? Do you see the reasoning and why I'm seeking a different viewpoint? The computer in back, in the technical place where we usually huddle and try to get things right, has about 35 versions of the Bible in it. I have a couple more old-fashioned print versions at home. There's a wealth of commentary on the internet. During preparation, I have worked with 4 versions of the Bible. The Revised Standard Version, the Bible that I originally learned, the New International Version, 2011, which we use in worship at OSUMC, the Common English Version, a version that I picked up this summer and is really worth reading, and the Message, which is a version perhaps more poetic, but certainly with longer translations of the verses. I guess you'd say I've used alternate sources for preparation today. Verses from the International Version will be shown on this background, and verses from the Message will be shown on this background. I hope that these visual cues will help you to understand. Let's back up a bit. The NIV translation, the version used for our reading today, Matthew 4:18, says, as Jesus walking along a beach, he saw 2 brothers, Peter and Andrew. He said to them, "Come, follow me." The Message says it's a little different. In the Message, he said, "Come with me. I'll make you a new kind of fisherman out of you." A bit later in verse 21, he saw another pair of brothers, James and John. Jesus called them also. He now had 4 followers that he had called, specifically asking them to follow him. These 4 were all Matthew had recorded before he began the story of the Sermon on the Mount. There might have been more, like 12 total. However, even 12 isn't a very big number. In Matthew 23 through 24, he talks about his travels, Jesus' travels, through the countryside. Here in Matthew 4:25, however, reflects that Jesus had a big crowd following him. But wait, look at the message, Matthew 4:25. This really looks like a huge crowd. Now, starting with today's scripture, let's take a more critical look at the scripture. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him. Nothing is said about the crowds following him up the mountain. By the way, I didn't see where Jim and Andy and John and Pete or any of the others had been made disciples at this point. They were simply referred to as followers. They were called to follow. Yes, I know disciple means follower, but they had just been called out by Jesus and asked to follow him. Don't we tend to believe that disciples are committed to following Jesus, living in his teachings, and going forth to make disciples in the world? Maybe these 12 were just disciples in training. Could Jesus, upon seeing the crowd, been saying to himself, wow, I have to get some help with this, teaching and spreading the word. I've got to train some men to help me. Could that thought have caused him to go up the mountain, sort of as a retreat to consider his options? The called, his disciples, followed and came to him. Might this be the view now? Could this be Jesus' first staff meeting? Would you or do you feel more involved in the story if you had been called to follow? Are you perhaps looking at this from the inside outside now? Are you a member of the group, hearing Jesus' teaching in person? Or are you saying, staff meeting, unbelievable? I can hear that. But let's look at how it's translated in the message. When Jesus saw his ministry drawing crowds, he climbed up a hillside. Those who were apprenticed to him, the committed, climbed with him. Arriving at a quiet place, he sat down. Let's go one more step. You are sitting on the ground among the 12 that have been called out or chosen. You are looking up to this charismatic man and asking yourself, why? You're wondering where you are going. You are wondering what you are going to do, and you are wondering who's going to support us. I remember my first try at learning differential equations. My son is over there in his A-Stat class, but it took me a few. The first thing the professor said was, when you get through with this class, you'll be able to design an automotive shock absorber. But in contrast to this more typical class or meeting beginning, Jesus doesn't start out with what the follower is going to do or be able to do. Jesus starts out this meeting by telling you how you are going to feel along the way. He's being honest with you. He's saying that even though this course and this road are going to be tough, very rough, you will be blessed. The Common English translation uses happy in place of blessed. Kind of an interesting thought. Let's look at the first beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus might have been saying to you that along the way, you will be telling this story. You know what you want to say. Better yet, you know what has been laid upon your heart to communicate. The people are looking at you. They're looking at you with blank stares. They're listening, but they're not hearing you with either their minds or their hearts. and you are becoming frustrated. You're ready to quit. You are the one who's poor in spirit. But you made a commitment, and you've been given a trust. You make a decision to get out of the way and let God work through you. And then you feel a strange warming, a blessing. And thank God, the message is truly heard by your audience. The lessons continue. Now Jesus is saying, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Wait a minute. I always thought the meek were milquetoast. That might be an old saying, but it certainly describes the situation as some of us see meek people. I just caught myself. I'm looking from the outside in. Let me try to look to the outside as a meek or humble person. Okay, I'm quiet. I'm gentle. I don't feel scared. I don't covet anything. I'm not aggressive because I don't have to prove anything. I'm not loud. I'm confident that I have what I need and am doing what I need to do. I might even be considered content. I guess that I have everything that can't be bought. With that, I feel blessed and secure. Can I really become a servant leader? Again, the lessons continue. Jesus might have said, "Before we break, I'd like to give you something to think about. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." Wow. Am I really going to follow this guy? Really? When the prayer was asked for the peacemaker this morning, would I have done that? Now I start thinking. The first thing I think about is the brawl in the street that I saw before we came here. Would I have to break that up? And what about the parent in the food store who was hitting a child's hand and dragging him along because he just picked up a toy? It's none of my business. And there are political arguments. There is no respect, me, and me. And again, why should I seek peaceful discussion and discernment? I certainly can't be a peacemaker in the Middle East. What exactly is Jesus talking about? When Jesus resumes, we are somewhat anxious. The Message report Jesus' words slightly differently. Specifically said, it says, show. It doesn't say teach. It doesn't say butt in or judge or mediate or arbitrate. It says show. Live the life. Don't cause conflict. Think before you talk. Don't cause injury. Live peacefully. When you do these things, it says that you will discover who you really are. Your place in God's family. That would certainly be a blessing, but I'm having trouble seeing my life, I guess, doing some of that. But on the other hand, living peacefully and in harmony would remove a large amount of wasted energy in my life. And that would be a blessing. Now I know there are more Beatitudes, and I know that this isn't a complete list of the feelings that disciples will feel as they follow Jesus and become true disciples, not just disciples in training. How would you feel when you have to go get that donkey that Jesus requested later on in the Gospels? How would you feel when you have to ask resources to support feeding and clothing the poor, or supporting your very own disciple ministry? After Jesus explained a few more blessings the disciples would feel as they grew in this new life, the staff meeting came to a close. Jesus left the disciples. And please hear this, you and me, with this very important message. Let me tell you why you are here. You are here to be the salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. The salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. I'm sure from the information further on in Matthew, people were now beginning to come up to the mountain. Where did this guy go? Where did those followers go? And a crowd probably was beginning to form, and the sermon format probably began shortly thereafter, after the staff meeting. You see, he had much to teach, and a lot to teach a lot of people. But to his disciples, he needed to explain to them how they were going to feel and how they were going to live their life, and it really, truly could be a blessing to follow him and spread the word. Let's look at what happened in this 20 minutes today. Whether you've been seeing yourself at Jesus' feet with the original 12, or you've been contemplating following Jesus along this road, or you have committed to follow him, you have learned or you have been reminded just how wonderful, peaceful, and yes, even blessed that you can be as you undertake his work. And God has told you that you add a lot to life experiences, and through you, he will bring out the God flavors of this earth. I am truly odd. I probably tried to put 10 pounds in a 5-pound bucket. Mr. Frobish, back in the technical side, barring any technical difficulties, we'll have this up on the internet and the our website, just like he always does. So if you want to look at it again, please do so. That is the sermon again. And if you don't agree, or you see this subject from a different viewpoint, or want to question me more, or want to simply comment on it, please, and I mean this genuinely, please call, text, email, or even buttonhole me. I hope to learn more from you. Now for the take-homes from today. You know something about the journey. The fact is, you are traveling on a journey. On which road will you travel? Don't be afraid to take a look around and see where you are. Look from several different views and check your filters before you begin traveling and as you travel the road. And finally, you can count on being blessed. When you follow this road, are you ready to travel the disciples' road? Good travels and Godspeed. Now please join in singing our final hymn, Come and Find the Quiet Corner, on the screens in number 2128 in the small hymn book, The Faith We Sing.